The majority of graphic novels, mangas, and kind of visual books are reliant on really strong usage of line art, text, and dialogue to communicate an idea to you. For manga specifically, you're not going to have a lot of color, if any color, and so there is an extreme reliance on strong ink work and penmanship to be able to communicate. And that is something that, for the sake of my graphic novel, I really want to work on being incredibly effective with and having honed before I actually start drafting too much of the illustrations for the project. So if you want to watch me work on that, hi, hey, hello. If you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you stopping on by to my little corner of the internet. I'm working on getting more familiar with directly drawing in pen and kind of expanding upon my understanding of shape so that I can communicate more effectively without an over-reliance on undersketches to communicate my overall theme, to kind of maximize my workflow and my ability to confidently put pen to paper. If you're interested in seeing all of my little doodles for this week and my little exercises artistically, stick around to the end of this video. But I think that's enough of the intro. Let's talk about the kind of overall desire and goal and how I went about and am going to continue to go about expanding on this skill set. I recorded the audio for the entire next section without actually defining the terminology that I'm going to be utilized. So this is future Rain discussing line quality real quick. So line quality is mostly just the actual kind of visual quality of your line. It's really not something super in-depth or super complicated. So if you have a chicken scratch kind of habit where you're just really not connecting your lines and you're really unconfident, so you're just drawing a little bit, lifting your pen, putting it back down, drawing more, that's considered usually a weak line quality because it's very uneven, it's not coordinated, and you didn't have the confidence to do it in one single line, one single arm movement. And so your line quality will be considered generally kind of weaker if your lines are very uneven and they clearly are not kind of going to the point that they're supposed to. However, it can be an artistic decision, and so the line quality also just refers to an extent at the very least, the way that an artist utilizes their lines to kind of tell and present their narrative. So when I'm talking about line quality, I'm talking about the way that I want my line to look, not necessarily if it's a good or a bad line every single time. It's kind of a fluid term, and I utilize it as such. So if there's any confusion, just let me know in the comments and I'll try and elaborate more thoroughly, but let's get into past Rain's explanation of why I'm doing what I'm doing today. Ink work is usually the thing that I'm most attracted to in an artist's work. Usually the first thing I see is their line quality and how they utilize lines to emphasize an image. I do really like painterly art styles that are not reliant on line work basically at all. However, usually a strong line art and inking style is really what attracts me to an artist. And when I say an inking style, this does apply to pencil sketches, the way that they utilize lines to box in the shapes and communicate something, as opposed to color, utilizing shading and hatching to communicate something. That's a really, really attractive quality to me in an artist's work. This kind of goes back to the fact that I am originally a science major. I got my degree in botany before getting my degree in studio art. And this is largely an artistic attraction, I think, to those kind of vintage and more kind of classical scientific illustrations, those pen and ink drawings that you can find in an old botany, zoology textbook. Those were what I originally kind of perceived as like my pinnacle of art. That's really what I wanted to do when I started to take art more seriously originally. Scientific illustration was really my goal and my original artistic dream. Then I found out that it's incredibly weird to get into the scientific drawing community, and they have this weird like the actual like Scientific Illustrators of America is like a membership program where you like pay to get to hang out with other scientific illustrators, and I was like, what is this weird community? And overall, it just like the vibes did not check out, and now I draw hot people. But that's kind of an aside and not particularly the important part, but basically, I think that because I was science in nature when I was much younger, and that was what I focused most of my education on, that is the art that I spent the most time with, whether I really like think about it or not. And so I really built a strong attraction to it. And I also was one of those students who had really well illustrated botany notes and stuff like that. And so I kind of was more like, even though I wasn't doing it with an artist mindset, it was something that I was more familiar with and confident with. So I think it also came more naturally because I had been doing it in my notes for so much longer. But overall, I find ink work really attractive. People who do more traditional ink work styles with dip pens as well, it's not something I personally can do with just how messy I am, but it's something I just find so attractive. And when I was looking at graphic novels to kind of inspire my artistic decisions for my own, a lot of the things that drew me to them and like the ones that I actually picked off my shelf to keep in my art space as my inspiration, it was the way that they communicate with lines. So one of these like key graphic novels is In Real Life. I really love the line quality. It's digitally done to my understanding. It's almost entirely flat colors, but it has a really nice grainy kind of like a digital pencil kind of texture to it, and I really love it so much. And then I really like The Girl from the Other Side. It's one of my all-time favorite mangas ever. It's probably maybe my top graphic novel. I'm not usually somebody who believes in favorites. I usually can't decide. But when it comes to The Girl from the Other Side, it artistically speaks to me in just ways that I've never been spoken to by a manga before. Though, just to like add to the list, my kind of like top 5 artistically would be The Girl from the Other Side. Definitely Granoliers. I'm really, really sad that that's on an indefinite hiatus as of like, 2017, and I'm still like, please come back. Please, I love your work. Can't Stop Cursing You. Then I really like Witch Hat Atelier and Blue Period's art style as well. Then I do really like Death Note, but I don't really know that the art and line quality captures me the way that those other 5 kind of grab me. It's not super drastically different, but I think those would be my top 5 in terms of inking inspiration. And I think the best way to achieve that is to diligently practice it and be more intentional with the way that I utilize lines. Now, I've talked about on my channel very distantly, like, if you're new here, and by new I mean within like 2025 joining my channel, I don't think I've talked about it, but because of my chronic illness, my line quality when it comes to inking is incredibly weak. And I have developed a workflow and an artistic system to kind of mitigate the obvious imperfections, but I don't know if you can call them an imperfection if it's like a health reason and not just a skill you haven't honed, but we'll put imperfections in quotes and we'll utilize it to communicate that it is a undesirable outcome per normal standards. Like, we'll utilize that language, right? So I have really shaky lines, and I usually am not a huge fan of it for illustrations as an overarching theme. In other people's work, people who like focus on shaky line art, that's wonderful. I love it. I like to utilize a shake to my line to communicate something in particular. And so I really want most of my lines to be even and consistent so that when I do have shakes in my line art, it is obviously communicating a nervousness, a fear, a discomfort, or it's a shaky text box line, so it's communicating kind of a quibble? Wow, I just mixed words. A quiver to a character's voice, right? I want that wobble to be intentional and not consistent throughout all of my art style. And so I really want to hone having as straight and like good of lines as possible so that I can have very intentional line art to communicate everything, right? And so recently I started really working with paint pens and things like that to kind of mitigate the issue overall, because I can just keep painting over my bad line art. Bad's not the right word. It's not bad. It's just really difficult for me to do the line art I want to do with my condition and is time consuming. And so a paint pen approach usually is more efficient because I can carve out the parts of the line art I don't like and just cover over it and redo it multiple times instead of building and building or having no way to undo it at all. But I developed most of my early art experiences, line art around intentionally knowing I'm going to have lines I don't like. So I use really thin line art and then I continue to build up my line art with different and thicker pen nibs until I get it to where I want so I can continuously even it out if I continue to have issues. And I usually decide the lighting for my illustration based on the line art and how much I need to thicken parts of the art, and I'll then choose my light source based on that. So say I really just have a hard time with the side I start with. So say I have an illustration and I start inking on the left side and I'm just really weak and I'm not doing the job I want to do. And it starts to even out and get a lot nicer on the right side. Because the left side will get thicker faster and the line art will be harder to kind of manage for me, I will make that the side that's in shadow so that it just looks like an intentional decision. I think it would make more sense if I did a kind of like demonstration. Maybe I'll make a YouTube short about it and explain it a little bit more thoroughly with like a little doodle to articulate it. But I utilize my kind of art errors and the things that I'm not proud of as ways to just make artistic decisions. That's in shadow now. It's in the background to kind of just cover up the mistake and look the piece look more cohesive. And it's worked for me so far, but as I started to develop a more paint pen oriented art style and I've really just not had to work on my line art being particularly strong, I've definitely noticed I've lost a lot of my artistic qualities that I was really proud of like a couple years ago. I was really proud of my line art and the way I did it. I was really proud of the quality of my lines because I had been working on it for so long because it was what I liked to do. Then additionally, I've noticed I haven't been able to draw directly in pen without a lot of guidelines the way I used to either. And so when you work in pen, you have to be confident in the decisions you're making or ready to face the consequences if the decision doesn't turn out how you want it to, right? And so I was really just getting good at not using guidelines because I was drawing directly in pen so often, sketching in pen so often that I was able to just draw the eyes, nose, and mouth without guidelines to achieve the desired kind of facial proportions. And I've really lost that. I've started to really need guidelines to understand the human face again. And I'm not happy with this kind of degression in my art. And I really want to rebuild that skill and reacquire that kind of ability to draw based on shapes and then kind of adding the details within it. You know, I want to be able to focus more on the silhouette and then kind of move inward than having a bunch of guidelines and having to erase them, you know? And I really want to work on this quality and this ability. And so I need to intentionally practice it because I clearly lost it by doing what I'm doing right now. And I don't know if this is making perfect sense as it is, but I'm going to now discuss it as an example within the drawings that you're seeing on screen. So it's going to start to make a little bit more sense right about now. So the sketch that you're actively looking at right now is one of my more unconfident sketches from the page. And so this is the better example of this issue at hand. I have this big arching line that goes right down the center of the chest and is accounting for the curve of the body. Now, that is a line that but I don't want to have in my sketches because I want to be able to know intrinsically where that line is. I want to be able to visually map it in my head so that I don't need to sketch it every time and I can draw directly in pen more effectively. That line is so that I know where to place the curvature and kind of how I want to separate the breast. The character, she is leaning backwards and arching her back, so her breast that is closest to us, the one that is on her left side, is being pulled by gravity downwards. So I needed to put that line because I'm not as confident with placing these body parts anymore. I needed to place that line so I can make sure the separation indicated that pull of gravity a little bit more effectively. And so the way to kind of approach fixing this issue in the future is to say I really need that line, I can't figure it out, and I don't feel confident enough to place the breast down without that line. The method is to then design the hair so that I can blend that line into the decision that I made, right? So I can cover it up and make it look like a natural part of the illustration, so the mistake or the need of a guideline feels a little bit more integrated into the piece overall. And this was another sketch where I was just like, okay, clearly I need to practice a more dynamic pose system because that entire back and side line, the one that's separating the kind of left breast, and oh, gesundheit, Fizzgig. I think my cat's done sneezing, so. But that back line is really just scratchy, hatched up. I'm really unconfident, and the kind of method and fix for that would be the only thing I can really think of doing that would be kind of visually a cover up for it would be to add a very thick, probably 0.8 size line pen, and then to make that a very thick line to kind of cover up the hatchiness of it. And now usually I am pretty confident in my lines. There's a difference between chicken scratch and a more hatchy kind of quality. Chicken scratch is when you can't draw the line or are not confident enough to draw the line, and so you're making a bunch of different lines to try and connect one line, right? You're not committing to the overall movement of the line. God, I'm using the word line a lot. Take a shot of water every time I say line. You'll meet your hydration goals. It's when you're really not confident, and so you're doing micro lines to achieve the one singular line, and that's chicken scratch, right? You have a lack of confidence, and it kind of shows, right? There's a difference in the quality between a line that is done by somebody who isn't confident in it and a line who is done by somebody who has a hatchy, scratchy kind of art style or sketching style and is just kind of going with the flow or making a bunch of hatched lines to indicate shading or something. And that back line really just looks more like chicken scratch than it does the sketches of the hair, where I'm kind of building up the lines to try and indicate a bit of a shadow and things like that. And this pen is also a super thin tip, so the chicken scratch quality looks even more kind of intense on that back than it does in the hair, where I'm kind of just okay with the finer qualities of the line. And so I do probably need to find a better sketching pen, but I've been having an issue with gel pens and finding a pen that I like working with recently. This pen is sufficient, and I'm kind of okay with that. But when you're trying to build up the line and kind of cover up that chicken scratch quality, it just kind of ends up getting worse. Like, it isn't thick enough to really kind of hatch in or cover up a mistake without making it kind of even more obvious that you didn't like the line you were working with and wanted to try and cover it up. And so I found that I'm not quite ready to draw directly in shapes quite the way I used to be, and the best way to kind of approach fixing that is to make a guideline, right? Make a very bad, rough sketch that just generally places the ideas I want to communicate, and utilize that guideline as a template, rather than directly drawing and creating a full illustration on the kind of sketched out and guidelined illustration. I'm creating it just generally so that I can then look directly at it to figure out the basic idea of where I want features to be, so I can try and build familiarity with where they would be kind of in my not templated illustration, if that makes sense. I think that this could be best described as like, it's kind of like using a base in digital art, but instead of actually drawing on the base, you have the base next to the illustration you're doing, or looking at a 3D model of something before you kind of commit to the illustration overall. The hope with this was that maybe I would be able to figure out where I want to place facial features and be able to draw more intricate hair without it looking incredibly chaotic. I don't think I quite am mastering this approach, but I think that having that template, that basic template that shows every guideline and where I want things to be, is a positive step in trying to communicate to myself, this is what it looks like, now translate it over here, right? I kind of did this when I was learning digital art as well. If I really didn't understand something and it was a pose or a shape, I would put the picture of the shape in my digital program, trace over it, move that traced image over to the side, and then I would continuously replicate that kind of traced guidelined version I made until I was able to understand the shape I was working with and draw it without looking at it. And I would do that over and over again until I started to build muscle memory of how I wanted that thing to look, or how that thing looked in general, so that it wasn't wonky and it wasn't based on my negative kind of understanding of it. An approach to this that I had to do in an art class once was turning your reference image and your piece of paper upside down so that your brain wouldn't recognize the item that you're trying to draw and instead focus just on the silhouette and the shape, placing your lines based on where they are relative to other lines rather than allowing your brain the opportunity to say, I know what that looks like. I know how to draw that because I know what that is and I know what it looks like. I believe that this advice is born from a study that is referenced in The Right Side of the Brain. I was supposed to read this book for that class, but I didn't. And so I'm not entirely sure the actual psychology behind why this does work and why it wouldn't. I personally find that it makes it more difficult for me because I don't really translate things from image to paper well anyway. And I think that that is a big part of the reason why I'm really bad at realism. It's something that I need to work on as a skill. Like, I could get good at realism, I just really need to dedicate my time and practice to it. But I don't generally like to look at my image and copy it directly. And because of that, I never really kind of did good on those types of assignments because I was already trying to take creative liberties with my artistic decisions and the things I was drawing. Very much did not follow the you need to learn the rules before you break them when it came to anything that was realism related. I didn't do good on my still lifes or anything like that. They were pretty bad. My still lifes were really bad in my first ever art class. They're pretty humiliating actually, but that's neither here nor there. The overall kind of objective with this is if you want to build muscle memory, you need to force yourself to practice the thing without the training wheels eventually. The guidelines in this situation are my training wheels. They help me. They are going to ensure that I don't fall over and break my leg, but eventually I need to take the training wheels off so I can even see if I'm able to do what I want to do. Now, I don't think that the majority of artists need to actually do this or acquire this skill. Some artists do it naturally and guidelines really don't help them. Either way, this is a skill I want to hone to increase my ability to do my thumbnails for my kind of overall graphic novel and increase my workflow. This isn't something that I'm going to be doing when I want to do a fully finished illustration. This isn't what I'm going to be doing when I'm making the actual briefs and kind of first draft of the graphic novel either. This is for me to generate the ideas, understand the sequencing, and communicate the initial thoughts down on paper so that I'm able to understand how I want to create a full, properly rendered, and thought out image. It's just kind of to increase my thumbnailing process so that I'm able to finish my graphic novel before I die, because I'm an incredibly slow worker as is. It takes me a really long time to finish work compared to other artists, and I need to make a workflow that really just kind of jives with me and my kind of needs instead of kind of just hoping for the best. And so the overall goal is to gain confidence and be able to draw without extreme quantities of guidelines. However, if you're someone who is very guideline dependent, that is perfectly fine, and I don't see anything wrong with it. This is for me to kind of improve my workflow, and I don't necessarily recommend that you go through this process if it is something you're not interested in being able to do. Nor do I think that you have to be able to do this to be a good artist. However, I do personally think that there is a benefit in trying and practicing drawing in ways that are unfamiliar to you, because it teaches you stuff about yourself, your art style, and the way you think and process information that can either reaffirm the way that you do your art style or open you up to new possibilities that will make your art style, your workflow, your skill set even stronger for future illustrations. So would I recommend that you try and draw without guidelines and really work on focusing on the silhouette of an image and then filling in that space? Yeah, I would. I do recommend it. And I think that once you have a good understanding of the silhouette, you are a little bit more prone to designing interesting characters, because the silhouette is one of the most important aspects of character design. It is something that people are incredibly reliant on, and it will get characters vetoed from game lineups or help give them the way into the game lineup. I recall reading about why Silco wasn't in the game League of Legends, and a part of that was because his silhouette just wasn't diverse enough and different enough from some other characters that already existed in the game, and so he just didn't pass the check to make it into the actual League of Legends game. At least originally. I don't know if he has been added since the production and the popularity of Arcane, because I don't play the game personally. However, it's narratives like that that we run into where we kind of can start to understand, okay, the silhouette, the outline of the character is really important. If you were to fill in the shape of your character with a color bucket of black or just a color, what would it look like, and can you actually tell what it's supposed to be? Does your character just look like a basic blob against this white background? Can you distinguish the hair? Can you get a general idea of how their body and their pose is? Or do they kind of just look all closed in and all together? You want to have a silhouette for your character that is enticing, because it's something that our brain recognizes immediately, and it's something that helps with our pattern recognition as well. So I also want to be able to do this because I want to have a better understanding of the silhouette of what I'm working on. This is not just a benefit for my ability to increase my workflow, but it is forcing me to think about and consider the silhouette of the character, the illustration that I'm drawing, and I can make executive decisions because I'm really thinking about it to add details and remove details that are irrelevant to actually providing intrigue to the shape of the design, the overall way it will look, and the way that that shadow box will look for the character if it ever needs to exist. So this is also just a way of me kind of benefiting and expanding on my understanding of things that are beneficial and intricate for character design reasons as well. So those two previous reasons are pretty hand in hand and related to each other in terms of how they benefit me artistically and why I want to hone those skills. The last reason is purely for, well, not purely, but it is predominantly for a psychological reason that I want to get good at this and be more comfortable doing it. And that is, perfectionism is like the death of creativity. And I need to be able to accept mistakes and be comfortable with mistakes when lining because I haven't been lining very much for the past several months. Yes, I'm very mistake prone in general compared to before, but also I was not a perfect liner ever, and I don't believe that there is such thing as perfection in art. Therefore, I'm kind of out of practice with accepting imperfections, accepting mistakes, and then covering up mistakes to try and save a piece if it's such a dire issue. And so, because I'm out of practice and I haven't been in the headspace where making a mistake is just part of the process, you keep going. You just fix it or you accept it and move on. I am very much nervous that I'm not going to be able to handle making mistakes the way I used to and with the grace I used to. I'm so used to using paint pens now where I just cover up my accidents and I just hope it looks good and just working and working paint to paper until it looks good enough or the accident is like it never happened. However, when I was using ink all the time, I just kind of accepted, oh, there's a mistake. I drew that line too long and it cuts in. Guess I'll have to shade this section in entirely black. I'll have to thicken this line art, this, that, and the other. Oh, I completely messed up the proportions on this thing. I'll have to do an all black background to make it look normal again. And I'm not used to that creative problem solving my own accidents anymore because I could kind of just cover it up and move on. It's kind of similar to how people argue that digital art isn't real art because you have the undo button. When you work with a medium like paint, you kind of also just have an undo button. It maybe is more work to undo it, but you still kind of have an undo button. You can just kind of go back in time by putting more layers of paint on or dissolving it. Kind of like when you put a sponge to water paper, like a wet sponge, you can usually kind of just erase your accidents pretty well, you know? And so because of that, I'm very kind of out of practice with just having confidence in my mistakes, you know? Bob Ross's happy accidents, in my book, they're just something you can cover up when you're working with a medium that is so kind of opaque. And I'm nervous that I'm not going to be mentally ready to make mistakes when inking my comic because I haven't been practicing my own moral and personal beliefs that there is no such thing as perfect art and accidents are simply bound to happen, going to happen, and are part of the process. Because I haven't been forcing myself to practice what I believe because I can kind of just cover up the mistake, I'm nervous that I'm going to feel crushed and be overwhelmed with this feeling that I'm not good enough when I'm actually working on the inking part. Now, I know I believe it. I know I was good at it in the past, but how am I supposed to know if I'm going to be able to do an entire comic book's worth of line art without feeling inadequate if I don't force myself to actually engage and practice what I preach by allowing myself to make mistakes and just kind of accept it and make it part of the process again. And I'm not going to stop paint pen art, obviously I love it, but I've been coming across a lot of people in my degree program who are feeling like my work is a little bit too hypersaturated, my colors are a little bit too chaotic at times, and that I can benefit from learning to tone it down at times as well. And I don't think I want my graphic novel to be hyperpop either. Color plays such an important role in the way that we communicate ideas as artists, and because my graphic novel is about PTSD, trauma, and the repercussions of your own actions, your mistakes, the things that you've done wrong, and learning to live with those mistakes, being a new person, and all of that. Because of that, it doesn't make sense for my graphic novel to be poppy, colorful, and super saturated because a lot of it is going to be about intense negative emotions that a lot of people aren't ready or given the space to deal with in their own personal lives. And we're going to be confronting some topics that are really deeply personal and psychological for me as well, because this graphic novel is part of my healing process. And so it really is supposed to be more macabre until Loki starts to see themselves and heal. And I can't just rely on hyperpop colors to fix my mistakes because it's not going to do the narrative justice. And I also really like dark drab and neutral colors as well. My favorite art period is the Baroque period. I really like dark, dark colors and neutral to kind of grayish, drab color palettes is kind of my thing, with at least like one super color, right? So I would ideally only really have bright colors in the form of like cyan and hot pink, and then the rest of everything else be very neutral and dull. For a lot of the beginning, where Loki is trying to figure out even who they are, let alone why they are forsaken and hated by the public, whether the public knows who they are or not, they hate Loki for what Loki did. And Loki doesn't know what they did because they forgot and their memories are shambled because of the trauma they experienced and the mistakes that they have made. And so, how do I just hyperpop colorful away such intense emotions when there's supposed to be a positive ending where Loki learns to live again and figures out who they are, right? And so ultimately, I can't rely on bright colors to fix my mistakes, and so I really need to just encourage myself to get comfortable again with accidents and mistakes being part of the process and learning to kind of work around them again. And I really feel like creative problem solving was one of my favorite parts about line art in the first place. Oh, you completely messed up that bottom eyelid line. Okay, how are we going to make the face not look completely lopsided and terrifyingly horrendous? How are we going to fix this, right? I used to really enjoy that part of the process and seeing what I could do to fix my own mistakes and how far I could push it until I just need to restart the drawing, right? And so I do miss it. I miss just having to really think about how to solve my problems instead of just like slap a skin tone over it and hope, right? And so I really do miss it, and I'm excited, and I really enjoyed this, just sketching in pen and not caring and just letting it happen, and really thinking about what I wanted to do and trying to not use guidelines was a fun, enjoyable thing, and I learned a lot about how I kind of think about space and how I kind of approach things in proportion to each other, ideas on what will make illustrations better and not as good, and so overall, I'm really excited about this kind of experience, and I think it'll make working on Hyperpop paint pen illustrations more fun. I haven't wanted to do a finished illustration in months because I feel like I'm just like, it's all the same, and I don't really get to have a lot of variety. I don't know why I'm treating myself this way because I can just do marker art, or I can do marker and paint pen art, or I could do just simple ink work, right? I don't have to box myself in, and yet I feel like I keep thinking to myself, oh, I'm gonna have to whip out the paint pens that have been drying up and driving me bonkers for months now, and they keep separating, and I'm losing my mind over it. I don't have to do that. I could do marker illustration. I don't need paint pens involved, right? It's like I'm forgetting my roots, and I'm like, why? Why am I doing this to myself? I'm just boxing myself into a corner when I don't have to. And I think that it goes against a lot of the YouTube philosophies that people tell you to be like successful on YouTube. You gotta niche down, you gotta find your niche, you gotta find your community. My community is perhaps just the place where people are excited to create art regardless of the end result and the quality. And if that's not niche enough, then I don't want a niche, right? I enjoy making art for my own enjoyment and sharing it and being happy about art with people. I enjoy making important narratives that tell stories and then drawing goofy cat drawings, and I don't know. I feel like I've been boxing myself in, and this was just a really fun and pleasant way to kind of, just mix it up a little bit. And I'm really happy with how these sketches turned out. However, I can pretty confidently say that the illustration that I did last was the best, and I did utilize guidelines to achieve it. And I think that I'm just not quite there yet. I'm not quite to the point where I can just draw without the guidelines, and I'm going to have to put a lot of time into practicing by making the guideline sheet and then copying it without the guide, like drawing by referencing the guidelines but not actually utilizing them. I'm gonna have to do a lot of that type of practice, but also maybe finding a way to utilize a really rough sketch without it actually kind of fully being uncoverable. That sounds really weird, but so like when you draw a head, right, you place a circle and then you start drawing in the jawline. Getting used to just kind of doing a half circle and attaching the jawline from there, which I could then thicken up the line to cover the rough sketch underneath, will cut having that line going across the middle of the face, and maybe finding a way to do marker indications on the actual kind of rough guideline sketch that I can cover with hair later as a way to indicate the eye line, the nose line, and the mouth line until I'm at least more confident will be a way to start doing pretty solid pen sketches without actually kind of fully going away and getting rid of the guideline ideal, because I find that proportions are really the hardest thing artistically for me. And I've been doing character drawings for 6 years now, and I just will end up with the wonkiest faces still. If there really are just a lot of days, and probably more days out of the week than not, I feel like I've never drawn a face in my entire life. Like, the eyes are on different planes of reality, and it looked fine to me. And then I like lift it up a little bit, or I like step away, I come back, and I'm like, why are your eyebrows just gone? Where'd they go? What is this? Who is this? The mouth is not centered with the nose. The mouth not being centered with the nose is probably my Achilles heel. I do it so much on accident, and it drives me completely bonkers because, like, I know where the mouth goes. I know it. I do it. I can do it right. I don't know what's wrong with me. And so, really, I am somebody who is a little bit more reliant on a lot of iterations of sketches before I get something good. There are a lot of ugly drawings where the face is just completely wrong, out of this world bonkers before I actually find something that is actually kind of worth discussing, because I really need to just go through the failure process before I can make good work for the day. And I'm not entirely sure how that might impede my kind of artistic process in the future and creating a super efficient workflow. However, I am certain that I am building and understanding skill sets, and I am getting a better basis for where I should place things to make a very clear and cohesive silhouette. For the sketch that I used, the guideline map to kind of understand, the hair is covering the eyes in ways that makes it communicatively really difficult for a viewer to understand where the face is and how the hair is oriented. I need to be really intentional with where I place facial features and hair to ensure that my communication is really clear, because I'm not going to have a lot of words in between to try and tell the story if my art can't do it. And while my graphic novel is going to be a little bit more word heavy than some because I really want to tell an intricate story, I'm not going to be writing a, like, Les Mis type book where it's just thick and a ton of words, right? I need to find that healthy balance and be able to be confident enough in my art skills that I can communicate what I want. So, what I think I'm going to be doing for next week's video is I'm going to be doing line of action facial expressions to get even more effective at communicating facial expressions, emotions, and things like that, but also to build even more confidence in the way that I place features relative to each other, and ensuring that I'm actually making progress the way I need to create art that you guys will be able to read and consume and understand the story that I'm telling, right? Overall, I have certainly yapped long enough, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. I'm so thankful that you sat all the way through to the end of it. Like this video if you like it, dislike if you dislike it, comment if you have anything you want to say or share with me or discuss, any thoughts, opinions, all of that good jazz. Share with anybody who you think needs a good solid yap session and some penmanship skills. Then, I suppose, subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more of my content. I do this every Saturday at 9 a.m. PST. And I suppose that's all. So have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are. And with all of that being said, bye-bye!